My brother called it a junk pile with a roof. He said it laughing, standing in our mother's living room 2 days after her funeral, holding a glass of her good whiskey, like he already owned the place. My aunt was there. My cousin, the lawyer. A quiet man named Mr. Collett, Patterson, who kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be, and me, standing in the corner in the same black dress I'd worn to the service, still smelling faintly of the flowers from her casket. Mom had left my brother the house. The actual house. The 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois, where we grew up. The one with the bay windows and the finished basement and the backyard she'd spent 15 years landscaping, market value somewhere around $490,000. My brother walked through those rooms like he was already measuring for new furniture. I got a property, specifically a 1.3-acre lot on the outskirts of Rockford, about 90 minutes northwest of Chicago, with a small building on it that Mom had apparently bought at a county tax auction 11 years ago for $3,200. I had not known it existed until Mr. Patterson read it out loud from her will. My brother? I'll call him Derek, because that's his name and he's earned it. Looked at me when the lawyer finished reading and smiled. That tracks, he said. A broke-down shack for the sister who never got her life together. I didn't say anything. I had learned a long time ago that arguing with Derek in a room full of people only ever made me look like the problem. But I want to be honest with you about something. I was 31 years old at that moment, standing in my mother's living room, and I felt like I was 12 again. Like no matter what I did or how hard I tried, I would always be the daughter who got the consolation prize. The afterthought. The one who inherited a broken thing while the golden child got the real gift. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known standing there in that black dress, was that my mother had been far smarter than any of us gave her credit for. Let me back up a little because context matters here. Derek is 3 years older than me. He was always the one my parents talked about at dinner, his grades, his friends, his plans. I was the quiet one. The one who read too much and had too many opinions, and somehow never quite fit the version of daughter my parents had imagined. When I was 22, I took a job as a licensed practical nurse at a long-term care facility in Rockford. It wasn't glamorous. 12-hour shifts, weekends, holidays. I watched people at the end of their lives and tried to make those days easier. I was good at it. I believed in it, but it didn't make for impressive dinner conversation, and Derek never let me forget that. He worked in commercial real estate in Chicago. Made decent money. Wore the right clothes. Knew how to talk to our parents in a way that made them light up. Mom loved us both. I genuinely believe that. But Derek was the one she called when something good happened. I was the one she called when she was scared. So when she got sick, really sick, not just the early warnings, but the stage 3 kind of sick, I was the one who showed up. I drove to Naperville every weekend for 8 months. I managed her medications, coordinated her appointments, sat with her through the bad nights when she couldn't sleep and didn't want to be alone. Derek visited twice. Both times for less than a weekend. Both times he brought flowers and left early. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it's the truth, and because I think you deserve to understand the full picture before I get to what happened next. After the will reading, I drove out to see the property. I almost didn't. It was a 90-minute drive each way, and honestly, after everything, the funeral, the will reading, Derek's smug little comment, I was exhausted down to my bones. But something kept pulling at me. Mom had bought this place deliberately. She'd held onto it for 11 years without ever mentioning it to me. That didn't feel like an accident. The GPS took me off the interstate and down a county road I'd never been on, and then down a gravel path that wasn't really a road at all. And then I saw it. It was not a junk pile with a roof. It was also not, to be fair, in great shape. The building was an old commercial structure, maybe a former auto repair shop or a small warehouse, with a concrete block exterior and a metal roof that had gone rusty in sections. The lot around it was overgrown, full of scrub brush and a few mature oaks that had clearly been there for decades. There was a creek running along the back edge of the property, a gravel parking area in front, mostly reclaimed by weeds. But the bones were solid. I could see that even standing in the parking lot, the structure was intact. No collapsed walls, No obvious foundation issues. The roof looked like it needed work but wasn't failing. And the land. 1.3 acres in a county that had been slowly expanding north of Rockford was not nothing. I watched the whole perimeter. I stood at the back edge near the creek and looked at the oak trees and thought about my mother buying this place for 3,111 years ago. What had she seen in it? What had she been thinking? I found the key she'd left in an envelope with the property documents. She'd included it in a small box of personal items the lawyer had given me, and I let myself in. Inside smelled like dust and old motor oil and something faintly sweet I couldn't identify. The main space was large and open, maybe 2,000 square feet, with high ceilings and industrial windows along one wall that let in more light than I expected. There was a small office space partitioned off in the back corner, a half bathroom that still had running water when I turned the tap. I sat down on the concrete floor in the middle of that big empty room and I cried, not because it was terrible, because it wasn't. Because my mother had left me something real and I hadn't seen it coming, and I missed her so much it felt like a physical weight on my chest. And I didn't know yet what any of it meant. I sat there for maybe an hour. Then I got up, locked the door, and drove home. I didn't tell Derek I'd visited the property. Over the following few weeks, I started doing research. Quietly, on my own, the way I'd learned to do most things, without announcing it, without asking for help, without giving anyone a chance to talk me out of it. I pulled the county property records. I found out that the surrounding area had been designated in a 2019 municipal development plan as a target zone for commercial and light industrial expansion. A distribution company had purchased 40 acres 2 miles east of my property the previous year. There was a road widening project planned for the county road that ran past my gravel path, a project that would significantly improve access. I drove out twice more and walked the property carefully. I took photos. I measured things. I started calling commercial real estate brokers, not to sell, just to understand. What was this type of property worth? What were comparable lots going for? The numbers surprised me. Not in a lottery winner kind of way. More in a quiet, steady, this is actually real kind of way. The lot alone, based on recent comparable sales in the area, was likely worth somewhere between $85,000 and $120,000, and that was before factoring in the structure. A real estate attorney I spoke with told me that given the development activity in the corridor, values could increase substantially over the next 3 to 5 years. My mother had bought something for $3,200 that was now worth potentially 6 figures, and she had left it to me. I thought about that for a long time. Derek called me on a Thursday evening in late October, about 6 weeks after the funeral. I could tell from his voice immediately that something had shifted. He'd heard something or figured something out, and this turned out to be correct, had done his own research. "So I looked into that property Mom left you," he said, skipping hello. "Okay," I said. "It's zoned commercial." "I know," a pause. "Do you know what it's worth?" "I have a general idea." Another pause, longer. "Look, I think we should talk. I think the way Mom divided things wasn't really fair. You got a commercial property and I got a residential one, and when you factor in development potential, Derek," I said, "Mom's will was valid. Mr. Patterson reviewed it, everything was executed properly. I'm not saying it wasn't valid, I'm saying it wasn't fair. She had 11 years to change it if she wanted to." He didn't like that. I could hear it in the silence. Derek had spent his whole life operating in a world where things bent toward him when he pushed, and he was recalibrating. "I just think we should have a conversation," he said. "Maybe we could structure something. A buyout. Or a partnership." "I'll think about it," I said. I didn't think about it. Or rather, I did think about it, and what I thought was, no. What happened next took me a while to piece together, because it didn't happen all at once. About 2 months after that phone call, I drove out to the property for what had become a semi-regular visit. I'd started treating it like a project, bringing a notebook, taking measurements, researching renovation costs, thinking through what the space could become. A storage facility, a small commercial lease, a workshop rental. I had ideas. When I pulled onto the gravel path, I noticed the lock on the door was different. I stood there staring at it for a moment, thinking I must be misremembering. But I had a photo on my phone from my last visit. I'd been documenting everything, and when I pulled it up and compared, there was no question. Someone had changed the padlock. My key didn't work. I stood in that overgrown parking lot in November wind and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I called a locksmith. He came out that afternoon, confirmed the lock had been recently replaced, and let me in. Inside, someone had been there. Not to vandalize, nothing was broken or damaged, but things had been moved. The door to the back office had been opened. There were fresh boot prints in the dust near the windows. I called the county sheriff's office the next morning and filed a report. Then I called a real estate attorney, a different one, a woman named Ms. Caldwell who came recommended by a colleague at the hospital, and I told her everything. Ms. Caldwell was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when things get complicated. She didn't panic, she didn't minimize, and she didn't waste time. Within a week, she had helped me get the property formally transferred into an LLC in my name, something she said I should have done immediately after the inheritance, which, noted, I will not make that mistake again. She also sent a formal cease and desist letter to Derek, based on some preliminary evidence she'd gathered. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure Derek was behind it. I didn't want to believe he was. Even after everything, even after how he'd treated me at the will reading, I kept finding reasons to think maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe a trespasser. Maybe someone who'd seen the property and thought it was abandoned. Miss Caldwell was less charitable. Your brother is a commercial real estate professional, she said in that calm, precise way she had. He knows what this property is worth. He knows what's happening in that development corridor. And he called you 6 weeks after the funeral, trying to negotiate a buyout. This is not a coincidence. I asked her what she thought he was trying to do. Best case, he was assessing the property, looking for leverage. Worst case. She paused. Do you have the original property deed somewhere secure? I did. I'd kept everything in a fireproof lockbox at my apartment from the beginning, almost by instinct. Miss Caldwell told me that was smart. Then she told me what she'd found. I don't have the legal vocabulary to explain all of it perfectly, so I'll tell you what I understood. Derek had, at some point in the weeks following the will reading, contacted the county recorder's office with a question about the property chain of title. That was public record and not itself illegal. But Miss Caldwell had also discovered, through a contact she had at a title company, that someone had attempted to pull a copy of the original deed using documentation that suggested a different ownership claim. Specifically, a document that appeared to have my mother's signature on it. My mother had been dead for 2 months at that point. Ms. Caldwell laid this out for me with the kind of careful neutralness that told me she understood exactly how significant it was. Deed fraud. That was the phrase she used. Depending on what exactly had been submitted and what the intent was, it could constitute fraud, forgery, and potentially other charges. I remember sitting in her office and feeling something strange. Not anger exactly. Anger I'd felt plenty of by then. This was something quieter and sadder. This was grief with a hard edge. Because whatever Derek had or hadn't done, whatever he thought he was entitled to, he was my brother. And he had looked at what our mother left me and decided the right move was to try to take it. What do we do? I asked. Miss Drawn. Caldwell had already been in contact with the county recorder's office and had flagged the anomaly for review. She told me we needed to file a formal complaint, cooperate with any investigation, and in the meantime, make absolutely certain that my ownership was airtight. Your title is clean, she said. The will was valid, the transfer is documented, and the LLC is now on record. He cannot touch this property through legitimate means. And through illegitimate means. She looked at me steadily. That's what the sheriff's office is for. The investigation took 4 months. I went back to work. I kept doing my research on the property. I had a structural engineer do a full inspection. The report came back mostly positive, with some roof repairs needed and some electrical updating, both of which I'd expected. I got bids. I started a savings plan. I applied for a small business loan using the property appraisal, which came in at $97,000, as part of my documentation. I didn't talk to Derek during this time. He called twice in the first month. I didn't pick up. Ms. Caldwell had advised me to let all communication go through her. In the spring, I got the news. The county had referred the matter to the state attorney's office. The documentation that had been submitted, the one with my mother's signature, had been forensically examined and determined to be fraudulent. The investigation had identified Derek as the source. He was charged with deed fraud and forgery, both felonies in Illinois. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot after a 12-hour shift. Miss Canning? Caldwell called me and told me in her careful, even voice, and I sat there for a long time after she hung up, looking out the windshield at the gray April sky. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because I think sometimes in these stories the ending is supposed to feel like a victory celebration. It didn't feel like that. It felt heavy and sad, and also, underneath all of it, something that I can only describe as right, like a scale that had been tipped sideways, finally settling back to level. My mother had known, I think. Not about the fraud specifically. She couldn't have anticipated that. But she had known Derek. She'd understood, in the way that perceptive people often understand things they never say out loud, that her son would take the house and be satisfied, and that her daughter needed something different. Not charity, not sympathy, a foundation, a chance to build something. She had given me 1.3 acres and a concrete block building and all the possibility contained in both. I spent that summer doing the roof repairs myself with help from a friend and a lot of YouTube tutorials. It took 3 weekends and cost me about $4,200 in materials. I am not a contractor. My rows were not always straight. But the roof stopped leaking and I stood in the parking lot one Sunday evening in August, looking at what I'd done and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Capable. Solidly, quietly capable. By fall, I had my first tenant, a small landscaping company that needed storage space for their equipment over the winter. 6 months, modest rent, but enough to start offsetting costs. They renewed in the spring and brought a referral. A one-woman pottery studio looking for workshop space. I converted the back office into a bathroom and small kitchenette. I cleaned up the landscaping on the lot. I put up a simple sign with the LLC name and a phone number. The property isn't a gold mine. I'm not going to pretend it is. But it's mine, in a way that goes beyond the legal definition. I built something with it, slowly, carefully, with my own hands and my own money and my own decisions. And it's growing. The development corridor that the 2019 municipal plan identified is real. Things are moving. The appraisal I got last spring came in at $141,000, and a broker I've been talking to thinks that number will continue to climb. Derek pleaded guilty to a reduced charge, 1 count of attempted deed fraud, and received 2 years of probation and a significant fine. He did not go to prison. I have complicated feelings about that. Some days I think the outcome was fair. Other days, I think about all those weekends I spent in Naperville, managing Mom's medications and sitting with her through the bad nights, and I think the scale is still not entirely level. But I'm working on that. I'm a practical person. I can't change what happened, and I can't control what Derek does from here. What I can control is what I do with what I have. My mother left me something. It took me a while to understand exactly what. She left me the piece of this world that nobody else wanted. The overlooked thing. The property that looked like a consolation prize until you took the time to actually see it, to walk it, to research it, to understand what it was and what it could become. She knew I would do that. She knew Derek wouldn't. I think about that a lot, on the evenings when I drive out to the property to check on things. I stand in that big open space with the industrial windows and the high ceilings, and I think about my mother at a county tax auction 11 years ago, looking at this same building and seeing something worth $3,200 that she would one day give to her younger daughter. She saw it. And then she knew I would too. That's the inheritance that actually matters. Not the building, not the acres, not the appraisal. The knowledge that someone who loved me understood exactly who I was and planned accordingly. I hope you have someone in your corner like that. And if you don't, I hope you become that person for yourself. I've thought a lot about why Derek did what he did. Not to excuse it, what he did was wrong and the law agreed, but because I think understanding it matters more than just being angry about it. He looked at that lot and saw money. That's it. He didn't see the creek at the back edge, or the way the oak trees looked in November light, or what it might feel like to stand inside a building you'd fixed with your own hands. He saw an asset he hadn't been given, and he decided that was an injustice he was entitled to correct, on his own terms, by any means necessary. That's what happens when a person spends their whole life believing the world owes them the best of everything. You stop being able to see things clearly. You stop asking whether something is right or wrong and start asking only whether you can get away with it. Derek was smart in a lot of ways. He knew commercial real estate. He knew how to read a development corridor. He knew exactly what that property was worth the moment he did his research. But intelligence without honesty is just a more sophisticated way of rationalizing bad decisions. And the decisions catch up with you. They always do. I'm not a person who believes in punishment for its own sake. I didn't want Derek to suffer. I wanted him to stop. The felony charge, the probation, the fine, those things happened because he made choices, repeatedly, even after I gave him the opportunity to walk away. That's not fate or luck. That's just cause and effect playing out the way it always does when someone keeps pushing past the line. What I keep coming back to is my mother. She was not a complicated woman in most ways, but she was perceptive in the way that people become when they've spent decades paying quiet attention. She knew her children. She knew which one would see the house and feel satisfied, and which one needed something different. Not a gift, but a test. A starting point that required effort to become something. She gave Derek the thing that looked like the prize, because she knew he'd always need to feel like he'd won. She gave me the thing that looked like nothing, because she trusted me to figure out what it actually was. That trust is the thing I try to live up to. Not perfectly. I make mistakes. I have bad weeks. There are mornings when I drive out to that property and feel the weight of how much work is still ahead. But I keep going. I keep showing up. I keep making decisions based on what's right and what's real, not what's easy or what looks impressive from the outside. Resilience isn't a feeling. I used to think it was. I used to think resilient people just felt stronger than everyone else. More certain, less afraid. They don't. They feel all the same things. They just decide to keep moving anyway. Every time I showed up to that property with a notebook and a measuring tape and no clear plan, that was a choice. Every time I called Miss Caldwell instead of doing nothing, that was a choice. Every time I didn't answer Derek's calls, that was a choice. None of those moments felt heroic. They just felt like the next thing I had to do. If you're in the middle of something hard right now, something where you got the lot and someone else got the house, where you're standing in a run-down parking lot wondering what you're supposed to do with what you've been given, I just want you to know that the value of a thing is almost never what it looks like on the surface. Look closer. Do the research. Get the right people in your corner. And don't let anyone who hasn't walked the property tell you it isn't worth anything. My mother knew what she was doing. It just took me a while to catch up.